Hello, everybody, and welcome to my Witcher Netflix Season 2 Deep Dive. I am doing a series where I go through each and every episode of The Witcher Netflix Season 2 and just share my thoughts on it. I'm also doing, in tandem to this, a Witcher book club, another video series where I am going through each and every chapter of the Witcher main saga books and also sharing my thoughts on those. So if you're looking for Witcher content, you should definitely hang out here on this channel and check out some of my previous videos. Before we get into episode 2, I want to do my other regular thing that I do for each episode where I share a cool Witcher item that I recently got because I got a lot of new cool Witcher stuff and I really just want to show it off. So I did one for episode 1 and now we're in episode 2, so this is what I'm showing off. I'm actually wearing one of them right now, my wolf school robe. I got some really cool Blackmilk clothing Witcher merchandise. Blackmilk is a clothing line. They do a lot of high-end nerdy, trendy fashion stuff, and they've done a lot of collabs with different brands. They did one recently with The Witcher. They're an Australia-based brand, and I ordered a couple of items from them. They actually had a pretty cool collection of stuff, and I originally had quite a few items in my cart when I was originally shopping the collection, but their stuff is also very expensive. I think it's part of their name brand. They upsell and upcharge a lot of their stuff, but also, I mean, it's pretty good quality. It's not like those throwaway clothing pieces that you would buy. Very high quality stuff, but just a little too pricey. So I ended up only getting 3 things. So here's what I got. First of all, I got this really cool Witcher school dress where on the skirt portion it shows all of the different Witcher schools. Then I got a Triss Marigold inspired dress. I love the color scheme for this. It definitely gives me the Triss Marigold vibes. And then finally, I got this cool Witcher school robe. I don't normally wear robes like this, but I just really liked the pattern on it and I think it just looks really cool. So yeah, this collection, I believe now a lot of it is sold out. When the collection dropped in December, I went ahead and bought as much as I could, but I think a lot of it is sold out if you are looking to get some stuff. However, I know that for the Cyberpunk collection that they did last year, the CDPR official merch store ended up selling some of the items later on their store. So if you want to get some of these items, I would just check the CDPR official web store and see if they're gonna have some of the Blackmilk stuff on there. All right, so episode 2 of season 2. Funnily enough, I already talked about episode 2 on a podcast, a Witcher podcast. Last week, I joined On the Path, a Witcher podcast, and we talked about episode 2 as our main discussion for the podcast. And I'm also going to be talking about episode 2 on another Witcher podcast, Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. I will be talking about episode 2 as well on that podcast, and that will be airing in the coming weeks or months. So why am I talking about episode 2 so much? I don't know. Actually, I kind of know. So both of these podcasts, when they reached out to me and asked about talking about season 2, they asked, which episode do you want to cover? And I didn't fully think this through. I was like, I knew I wanted to talk about an earlier episode in the season because I personally enjoyed the earlier episodes more than I did the last few episodes. I just was not a fan of the last few episodes. I'm actually dreading even talking about them on this channel. But I knew I wanted to talk about an earlier episode in the series. And so I wasn't really thinking through everything, and I said episode 2 for both of them. And I didn't even realize that episode 2 is one of the more controversial episodes of this season because of the Eskel incident. And so, I don't know, my brain didn't register that this is the Eskel episode. And so I agreed to talk about it on 2 podcasts, and now I'm talking about it again on this channel. So I am going to be so over episode 2 by the time all of this is done. So anyway, if you want to check out my discussions on season 2 with some other really cool folks, I will include links in the description below for where you can check out those Witcher podcasts. They have some great communities, so if you are just a Witcher fan and want to get more talking about The Witcher, you absolutely should give these podcasts a follow. the people, I would consider them friends of mine. They are really freaking cool. Go check them out. All right, now let's officially dive into episode 2. So this episode, again, I think is considered a very controversial episode, and we will talk about the whole Eskel incident later on. But I want to say one thing about this episode. After watching it through a second time, I really feel like, to me, the key takeaways of this episode wasn't the action part of this episode, but more so the dialogue and conversations that are had between a bunch of different characters. So Geralt and Vesemir have some great conversation. Francesca, Filavandrel, Fringilla, and Yennefer have some great conversation. And of course, Geralt and Ciri also have some great dialogue between each other in this episode. So to me, I put aside all of the weird action things and some of the other questionable choices that happen in this episode, and I tried to just absorb and focus on a lot of the dialogue that's had between different characters in this episode. And that was my key takeaway. I think even for me, I enjoyed the second storyline plot in this episode more than I enjoyed the Kaer Morhen part of it. I enjoyed the Fringilla, Francesca, Yennefer, Filavandrel, and the elf section more than I enjoyed all the stuff that was happening in Kaer Morhen. So this episode opens with Yen's weird dream with her happy little family, and I understood very quickly that this was a dream sequence, even a nightmare, if you would call it that. And regardless, it was just weird to see Yennefer and Geralt in, like, normal garb. It just did not sit well with me. And then, of course, the baby was just on fire. The whole sequence, I knew it was a sequence of bad dream. But then we learn that Yennefer and Fringilla were captured by the elves. And we get very early in the season our introduction to the elf storyline and the plight of the elves. We meet Filavandrel, who is a returning character from season 1, and then we meet Francesca Findabair, who is a new character to the series, but not a new character to the Witcher universe. And I gotta say, I actually love Francesca in this entire season. Not just this episode, but episodes to come, I loved everything about her. We find out that Francesca is pregnant, and that isn't something that happens in the books. I was a little confused by this addition to the plot of making her pregnant, but it's not that big of a thing to me. I was just kind of like, okay. It didn't really bother me that much. And I guess I understand the storyline because Francesca is a pureblood elf. And they kind of hint to that in this episode, that there's not a lot of pureblood elves left. And she is one of the few left. So her trying to have a child and continue this elven bloodline is makes sense, honestly. One little tidbit of lore for the world of the elves in The Witcher is that generally older elves can't really have children. The younger elves are the ones that are more likely to have children. So, and just in general, it's really hard for elves to have kids. So we kind of see that as the elves are moving through the forests here and trying to find this Dol Blathana, which is like a sacred land for them, or it's supposed to be their new home. And Francesca is supposed to lead them to Dol Blathana, but they're not finding it, and they're being unsuccessful so far. And we see that the elves are still struggling. We learned a little bit about it in season 1, and now season 2, we're getting even more of the issues that the elves are going through, and that they just don't have a home anymore. We even see some elven ruins. The elven ruins are another little nod to the books in that there are elven ruins that are destroyed by the elves themselves. So they would rather destroy their own ruins than have humans come and take them over or destroy them. They are so prideful. We learn more and more about the pride of the elves, but this is one little glimpse of that they are so prideful that they would rather destroy their own elven temples than let humans touch them. So Fringilla and Yennefer are captured, and Filavandrel and Francesca are having a conversation in Elder Speech, and Yennefer actually knows Elder Speech, and she chimes in, saying that she's part Elvish and that she can actually understand what they're saying. And this is a very interesting scene because, again, this show is really doing a lot to show Yen's elven bloodline in her, whatever like quarter or fraction of elf that she has in her. That's not something that's really touched on a lot in the books, but the show is really like pushing that hard because they've pushed it in season 1 and now they're pushing it again in season 2. But this is again where we get that glimpse of prideful elves. Francesca comes in and says, "You're elf? No. Do you sing our songs? Do you tell our tales? Have you shed a tear over anything elven? You are no elf." And I just love that line because that is exactly what an elf in the world of The Witcher would say. That's exactly what they would say. If somebody tried to claim that they were part elf, that is exactly what they would say because of how prideful they are about their own people. Meanwhile, Geralt and Ciri have arrived at Kaer Morhen. And this part of the show, my first time watching it, got me so excited because we finally get to see Kaer Morhen in live action. And it is just as awesome as I could have possibly pictured it to be. I honestly give full credit to the show for building out and CGing and building this beautiful Witcher stronghold of Kaer Morhen up in the mountains with the snow. It is absolutely everything I would have pictured for Kaer Morhen to be, and they did it, and it looks really cool. All of the other weird things that happen at Kaer Morhen aside, we gotta give credit that it looks really good. So Kaer Morhen is very interesting. There's a lot more Witchers than I would have anticipated. Obviously, the main 4 that we know of based on the books are Lambert, Eskel, Cohen, and Vesemir, and of course Geralt. They decided to add in all of these other Witchers, despite the Witchers being a very endangered species at this point. There were still just a lot more included in this reunion of Witchers. Watching this the second time, I felt like I was picking up more on the back and forth between each of the characters than I did previously. And I think it kind of gave me new context for this entire episode. They have Eskel enter and make a more dramatic entrance than any of the other Witchers. And he captures this Leshy and shows it. And, to me, I realize now it was like they were building up this Eskel stuff as much as they could before it all happened. We also get a cool scene where Geralt and Vesemir have a little bit of a talk outside, where Vesemir talks about the fact that Geralt brought this girl, Ciri, his child surprise, to Kaer Morhen. And I appreciate this dialogue a lot because it's beginning that relationship between Vesemir and Geralt and how I always pictured it, where yes, Vesemir is the more wise one, and he kind of imparts his own wisdom upon Geralt. And it was a good moment, despite the things that they do to Vesemir's character later on in the season, and I absolutely will talk about that. This was a good moment for me, and I appreciated it in the moment. And that was one of those good dialogue scenes that I was talking about that I feel like this episode has. There's another scene where Geralt and Ciri are hanging out together. Geralt is inspecting part of the Leshy that Eskel brought, I guess. And Ciri is talking about what they're doing exactly here in Kaer Morhen. Like, what's the point of them being here? What are they going to be doing for all of this time? And one thing that she brings up is that she wants to train. She wants to learn to fight. And Geralt at first is a little hesitant about this, and for good reason, because Ciri says that she wants to kill the Black Rider that she sees in her dreams, that Black Rider that we saw in Sintra when she was trying to escape. She wants to find him and kill him for all of the pain and anguish that he has caused to her family. And Geralt has a really good teaching moment here. He says, "We don't kill out of fear, we kill to save lives." First of all, it's a great scene because we get a little bit of Dad Geralt, and who doesn't love Dad Geralt? But also, it's a great nod to Blood of Elves, the book, because this line also comes up in Blood of Elves in a bit of a different context. In Blood of Elves, there's a moment where Triss is in Kaer Morhen, and she's having a bit of a heated discussion with the Witchers. They're talking about the political climate of the world and the Battle of Sodden, and the Witchers are being pretty uncaring about what's going on in the world, and Triss is trying to imbue some passion into them because whether the Witchers like it or not, this is where the world is going, and we all need to do something about it. And then Ciri kind of jumps in on the conversation. She's like, well, I want to kill the Black Rider. I want him dead. And Geralt, who's already losing his patience in this moment because of all the stuff Triss has been talking about, he kind of yells at Ciri. I don't know if he necessarily yells at her, but he's a bit more stern with her, and it really upsets her, and she runs away and she runs outside to go hide and be upset. It's kind of a different vibe in the show than it was in the books, but I actually kind of like it in the show because in the book, Ciri is depicted a little bit younger than she is in the show. Freya Allan is just a little bit older than Ciri, book Ciri. And so rather than it being like a moment of Geralt being like stern and angry at Ciri like it was in the books, in the show, it's a bit more of a mature discussion that he's having with her, but it's still a really good teaching moment for Ciri. So this conversation happens right before we get to the party scene, and this scene in particular is one of the controversial scenes of this show and this season. So Eskel decides to invite a bunch of people to Kaer Morhen, mostly sex workers, and they're having a grand old time, and all the other Witchers seem to be fine with this too. Even Vesemir doesn't seem to be fazed by the fact that Kaer Morhen, this very secret keep that's been mentioned previous times in this show, that it is a secret hideout, that Eskel has decided to bring in a bunch of ladies to party and dance. And other things. Geralt's the only one who sees something wrong with this, and he's like, what's going on? Eskel, you can't do this, man. And Eskel is clearly not in his right mind and is just like, no, we're gonna party and have a grand old time. Yeah, it's pretty out of character to have all of these people show up at Kaer Morhen. I mean, if we're even going by the lore of this show universe, even in Nightmare of the Wolf, when all those people came to Kaer Morhen and sacked Kaer Morhen, that was pretty dangerous. So I feel like Vesemir would have some sort of like click in his head where he would say, okay, we shouldn't have all these people in Kaer Morhen. We need to get them out. This is not good. The last time we had a ton of people here, they were rioting and killing a bunch of Witchers. So we cannot have people knowing about this secret hideout. Nobody really does anything about this. They imply that maybe like they'll forget about it tomorrow, which is just also very weird. In general, the scene is just not great. This scene and the whole continuing parts where Eskel begins to turn into a Leshy have been so controversial and so talked about on the internet that Lauren Hissrich made an entire thread, Let's Talk About Eskel, where she explained this scene and many other scenes and why they made that decision to include it in this show. I read through it and I understood it to a degree. I still don't fully agree with the decisions. I do like that she shared some insight on why they made the choice, but it's still not my favorite choice. But it's nice to have that context, I guess. If you want to read the thread, if you haven't had the chance to read it, I'll include that link in the description as well. So cutting back to the other plotline, Fringilla, Yen, and Francesca, the three of them have been having these shared dreams. And this, again, is not something that was in the books, but when they were explaining it in the show, I was actually kind of interested to start. I thought it was an interesting plot line, and I was like, okay, I don't know where this is going, but I'm here for it. And so Francesca is trying to dig deeper into this, and they eventually find this deathless mother who has been appearing to them in their dreams. And each of them have been seeing different people in their dreams. So Fringilla has been visited by Emir with a helmet on. Francesca has been visited by Ithleen, who is a famous elven seer, who's also in the books, and that famous prophecy, nigh is the time of the white frost and the white light, the time of contempt, the blood of elves, that whole thing. It's the prophecy that Ciri actually recites in season 1. That all ties to Ithleen. And then Yennefer sees an unknown person. And this was a very interesting choice. The fact that this person that Yennefer sees, we actually aren't supposed to know who it is. I actually looked up in the wiki later on, and they just say an unknown person. So it's supposed to be intentionally unclear who this is. I had thought that it was actually like a young Tissaia, because she eventually calls her Piglet, and she kind of has that attitude that Tissaia would have. So to me, I thought it was young Tissaia, but if it was, why wouldn't they just say Tissaia? They don't say it. So we're not really supposed to know who this is, and I don't know why they intentionally made it unclear who Yennefer's vision was. That's something I actually, if I had the chance to ask Lauren Hissrich a question about season 2, I would ask her that. I'd be like, hey, why did you intentionally make Yennefer's vision unclear of who it was? Meanwhile, Francesca and Fringilla, it was very clear who those people were. The Deathless Mother, and this is spoilers to later episodes, but we later learn that this is Voleth Mare. I didn't know this was Voleth Mare, so I knew that they were introducing a new character, Voleth Mare, because one of the episode names is that. And when I first watched this, I didn't know who this was. I thought this was just going to be some subplot of like an evil hag or witch who was like visiting their dreams or something. I didn't know it was going to be this powerful demon. And so she was talking to them more. And even there was one moment where she was like, said to Yennefer, I'm going to let you cook more. And to me, I was like, cook? Is she going to eat them? Is she a hag? I'm thinking about like old folklore, and they show this creeping hut like Baba Yaga. And so in my mind, I really am thinking that she's some sort of witch or hag, and she wants to eat these young mages, much like the witches of Crookback Bog in the Witcher games. One of the reasons why I don't want to talk about the later episodes of this season is because of the Voleth Mare plot. It started out okay. Like this episode, I was fine with it and I was interested in where it was going, but it takes such a turn later on in the series that I just was not a fan. So this is where we start to get the alliance between Nilfgaard and the Elves, because in these visions, Francesca learns that she should take Sintra, or Zintria, as they say in Elvish, to be the new elven home and make that alliance with Fringilla. And Fringilla learns, hey, if you want to be more powerful and be in Amir's favor, you should make this alliance because this is going to be good for Nilfgaard. And so they kind of make this agreement. And the alliance between Francesca and Amir / Nilfgaard, that is a thing that happens in the books a little bit later on in the storyline, but still nonetheless it happens. And this makes it a little bit different, where now it's kind of this weird prophecy from an evil woman that's making them form this alliance, when in the past it was more something Francesca wanted to do this because she wanted to help her people, and Amir wanted to do it for his own reasons. So they made this alliance, and Amir actually gives them Dol Blathanna. And they claim that as elven land, and Nilfgaard's like, we won't harm you, elves. You guys can have Dol Blathanna, and Francesca, you are the queen. And you guys can be happy in your little valley of flowers. So now let's cut back to the Kaer Morhen stuff, where Eskel now is getting into his Leshy form, and he fully transforms into a Leshy, and Geralt and Vesemir must fight and kill him. It's kind of sad, and it's kind of disappointing that Eskel had to die this way. This has been something, again, like I've said, that the internet has felt very strongly about. On Reddit, on YouTube, on Twitter, everywhere I've looked, this has been a very hot topic. Rightfully so. But I do want to address some things and my own thoughts on it, and these are not original thoughts. I've seen a lot of people share similar thoughts to what I have. So Eskel isn't really that big of a character in the books. The reason why everybody's so upset about Eskel is because CD Projekt Red made the Witchers to be very loved characters in the games. And honestly, CD Projekt Red did a great job creating these likable Witcher characters that honestly only have a few lines of dialogue within the actual Witcher books. The only big scene that I can think of that Eskel has in the Witcher books, when Triss is in Kaer Morhen, and all of the Witchers are being super stubborn to her, as usual. She's trying to figure out why exactly she's in Kaer Morhen. The truth is she's there to help Ciri. And none of the Witchers want to admit that they need help. The only one who does is Eskel. He gets like on one knee and he's like, Triss, we need your help. Please help us. And she's like, thanks, Eskel. And that was one moment where I was like, oh, Eskel's a cool character. He's not a douchebag. He's a nice guy. Lambert's the one who is not a nice guy. But now we see Eskel being not a nice guy and transformed into this Leshy. So a lot of people will say, why is everybody getting so mad over Eskel? He's not even that big of a character. You're right. But to be completely honest, we all love Eskel and Vesemir and Lambert because of the games. And this is not really a game-focused show. However, we still need to give respect to the games because many of us, myself included, and many of the people that I know and talk to about The Witcher, we would not have been into the Witcher franchise if not for the video games. It's just as simple as that. That's not everybody. Okay, there's a lot of folks who are big into fantasy books and probably would have picked up the Witcher books without even needing the games. But a lot of us were gamers first, and we played the games first, and that's what got us into the gateway of the Witcher universe and reading the books. So we have to pay respect to the games, because again, The Witcher would probably not be a Netflix show if not for the success of the games. So there's a lot of respect that we need to give there. So we all have an inherent game bias, which is why we're all so upset that Eskel died, because that game bias lets us think of Eskel in the games and how much we like him in the games, when in reality he's not really that big of a character in the book. Regardless of what his status is as a character, I still think it was not that good of a kill off of a character. And Lauren goes into this a little bit more in her thread, so I'm not gonna talk a ton about this, but it really would have been better if maybe we got to know Eskel a little bit more as a character, learned how he was in this particular version of the story. We get these flashbacks in later episodes of Geralt hanging out with Eskel, but we don't really have a connection to him. Again, based on how they're writing these episodes and watching through it all a second time, I understand that they wanted to do this early on because it has an impact for the later episodes. So they wanted to kill off Eskel pretty early and pretty quickly. But it doesn't really flow, and it just leaves people kind of stunned. I'm not a fan of it. I try to be as like nuanced and pragmatically thinking about it as possible, but regardless, just not a fan of the killing off of Eskel. So all of the controversial stuff aside, this episode ends, and I actually do like the final scenes. They're a little dramatic, but I kind of like the drama. So after Eskel dies, and Geralt kind of has this new perspective on things, he walks outside and he hands a training sword to Ciri, and the two of them begin training together. They're doing these similar maneuvers, and the camera pans over the beauty of Kaer Morhen, and you see Geralt and Ciri together fighting. And between that, we cut to a scene of Yennefer, our other main character. She is running through the woods, and we're realizing that she's actually lost her power. In season 1, she channeled that chaos from using fire magic, and it brought her to lose her power, and she no longer has that access to her chaos. And she's trying to cast spells and do something, and she's realizing that she can't. And she just breaks down in the forest and screams and cries out. And it's really gut-wrenching. Anya Charlachera is an amazing actress, and I think she conveys this emotion of Yennefer so well in this final scene, with her crying out that she doesn't have her magic anymore. Something I brought up in the podcast, and I want to bring up on this as well. In the books, we don't get a lot of Yennefer's struggles. We meet Yennefer as a strong character who's already been through all of her struggles, and we don't get any glimpse of that in the books. The show has this opportunity to show a side of Yennefer that shows her struggles, because Yennefer has never had anything come easy to her. She has had to struggle and fight and work for everything. She's never been handed good things on a silver platter. She's had to work for that. And we get to see that. We saw that in season 1 with her transformation. And we're seeing that in season 2 where she loses her powers. Like I said, I like the beginning of where the story is going. Yennefer losing her powers, I liked the idea of it and I was okay with where it was going. We'll talk more in later episodes about why I didn't like how it ended. However, showing Yennefer struggled and losing her power was something that I really liked, and I think Anya does a great job showing these struggles of Yennefer. The starch cut between Geralt and Ciri and then Yennefer is just very good and very impactful in this final scene, and I thought it was a good way to end the episode. So yeah, that's my episode breakdown. Final thoughts: not the strongest episode, but I liked some of the introductions to the dialogue and the characters. I feel like if you set aside the partying at Kaer Morhen and the Eskel turning into a Leshy, which are two things that I wasn't a fan of, the rest of the other stuff in this episode I think was really good, and I absorbed a lot of it. I loved Geralt and Ciri in this episode. I loved Yennefer and Fringilla and Francesca. I thought that they had some really strong moments and some really great dialogue to absorb. So that's it for me for episode 2. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you like? What did you not like? I'm sure there's a lot of things we can talk about. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!